I'm sure you will know Tamara quite well, but I'll just give you a little bit of background. She started her career as a technical sales advisor for a pharmaceutical company before completing her undergraduate degree in chemistry at the University of Hull. She then did her PhD at the University of Liverpool and wrote her thesis on utilising anionic bronze polymerization techniques for the synthesis of novel nanoparticles. She briefly works as a teacher in a college in Liverpool before returning to academia by joining a multidisciplinary team at UCL as a postdoc, where her research focuses on the synthesis and analysis of novel polymer materials for medical devices and drug delivery. Her second postdoc was a collaboration with the University of Iowa and focused on the development and improvement of rapid diagnostic tests for malaria. Tamara is now a lecturer in polymer material and materials chemistry in the department with a strong focus on student wellbeing, accessibility, EDI, and widening participation for all students. So I'll hand over.
Thank you. Thanks, Chiara, and thanks for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I told Chiara earlier today that I was feeling a bit nervous about doing this talk and that I felt a bit stupid because, I mean, I literally do this for a living, so I probably should be okay, right? But I think it was because it was for CPS and I was feeling the gravitas of this society. The committee got me these presents, which are really cute, and they've got my name and that I'm the 145th president on, and it made me think like, wow, I'm the 145th president. That's crazy. There's so much history in this society, you know, past presidents of lecture theatres named after them. So I think I was just picking up on that energy and feeling that way. So my talk tonight, so my talk tonight is a bit of a mixed bag. Just looking at the screen, it looks a bit very mixed bag actually. But being a lecturer in teaching means that I've got no current chemistry research to talk you through, but also at the moment I've got no official kind of social science pedagogical research to share with you yet. Watch this space. Hopefully all the other lecturers in teaching are going to have some research to share. So I thought I'd just give you a little window into my mind. So I'm going to chat a bit about my PhD research and how I had to hone my synthetic skills. I'm going to talk about the link between cooking and chemistry. These are two things that I really love. And also how this has influenced how I think synthetic skills should be developed in undergraduate and research students. I'm going to give you a Yorkshire pudding synthesis masterclass. And finally, I'll talk you through the synthetic skills course that I designed for postgraduate taught students. So I started my PhD in 2009, following 3 years post-uni of being a technical sales advisor for a chemical company. I was basically a very overqualified Avon lady for a chromatography company in this little sleepy town in Essex, one with all the different coloured streets. You know, if you know me, I'm sure you'll know that I got super bored there. And I really miss being in the lab as well. So I decided to go into research. I swapped these thatched cottages for the big city. And I began my PhD at the University of Liverpool. And I worked with Professor Steve Ranad on polymer materials for drug delivery. So Professor Ranad's group worked together with the Department of Pharmacology on novel drug delivery systems for antiretroviral therapies for HIV. They were using nanomedicines to increase bioavailability and decrease the side effects associated with antiretrovirals. HIV medication at that time came with a lot of side effects. The bioavailability was really low, meaning more drugs needed to be taken, more side effects, and this meant that patient compliance was low due to all these kind of side effects that I've got shown on screen. Missing doses could lead to the virus mutating and building up a resistance to the drugs. And at the time, I think there was only about 14 antiretrovirals that could be used. So if you became resistant to one of them, you kind of had to work through the different ones. So for me, seeing the advances in HIV treatment and prevention, I mean, in the Western world at least, with the introduction of medications like PrEP is absolutely mind-blowing, because even just 10 years ago when I was doing my PhD, the landscape for HIV and AIDS treatment was just so different. So this is a really basic, I mean, it's so basic, I probably shouldn't have put it up here, cartoon of what we were working on a group. So as a group, we were working on creating a nanomedicine that essentially could trap the hydrophobic antiretroviral drug, but then also have a hydrophilic element for solubility and drug delivery. And each member of the group had a different polymerization route to test. So some people working on dendrimers, some were using ATRP methods. Mine was anionic polymerization. So if you know anything about polymer synthesis, you will know that I definitely drew the short straw. This is a typical setup for anionic polymerization. It has to be done under strict vacuum conditions. Chemists used to have to learn glass blowing so they could create these kind of perfect air and water-free environments. And these two apparatus are from 2005, which when I was doing my PhD was like new and exciting, but obviously now is super old. So my first step before anything else, I had to produce linear polymers of a perfectly controlled size under strict conditions, but we didn't want them to be this strict because it was something that we were going to have to want to scale up to industry if we eventually started making the nanomedicines. But it was okay, you know, it was hard, but I loved my PhD and the research that I did at Liverpool. When I started working, there was a postdoc who was working on the same thing as me. And he had a really sort of scary, booming voice that would just shut the lab down silent when he shouted, which was a lot. I definitely toughened up in that lab. And I also learned that saying things like, oh, we've always done it this way, or this is how we always do it, can be one of the worst phrases that you can say in research and in life, really. So we were tasked with synthesizing, you can see at the bottom of the screen, these linear monodispersed polymer chains with strict degrees of polymerization. So I used to control N quite heavily. When the polymerization was living, so the styrene monomer was adding to the active living site, the reaction mixture was bright red. When the reaction had died, so no monomer could be added to the terminated chains, and the reaction mixture was white, and it seemed that the polymerization had failed. And if the postdoc's reaction mixture was white after 24 hours, then God help us all. If someone had the audacity to move his one cannula needle, I mean, just the trauma, I could just remember the trauma, probably should get over it. Then I came along, hi, and had all these brilliant ideas, like, maybe purchase more than one needle or use disposable needles. Maybe let's track the reaction to see if it actually needs this full 24 hours that you're dedicating to it. As it turned out, it needed 20 minutes. I did a lot of kind of kinetic. I think on here you can see that I've got the temperature probe, like checking the temperature. I did all kinds of kinetic reactions and everything to figure it out. And just various other tweaks to really streamline the process. And I made some really nice polymers. I could control the degree of polymerization really well, and they were very monodispersed. It took a lot of invention and investigation, and I had to perfect my own synthetic skills, but I successfully standardized this method, I think, after a lot of trial and error. But then I was free to try lots of other weird and wonderful things, because I knew I could always come back to this basic skill that I developed as a chemist. So the title of my course is, Does a Good Chemist Make a Good Cook? Before I went to university, I applied for a job at Reckitt Benckiser. So this was kind of the local place you went if you wanted a sciencey job, right? And one of the interview questions was related to cooking. Did I cook or bake often? Was I a good cook? And I thought this was a bit of an odd question at the time. But later on, years later, when I was doing a postdoc, a colleague who'd come from an industry job in chemistry said that one of the questions she always asked potential candidates when she was interviewing was, do you consider yourself to be a good cook? And this is something that's always stuck with me, because I guess what they were really asking was, can you follow instructions carefully, right? Are you able to read through a procedure carefully and apply your knowledge to performing the experiment? Do you follow instructions carefully to the letter? Can you produce something of a consistent quality every time? Can you identify when things go wrong, when and if they do? And these are all skills that you need to be a good cook and a good chemist. You know, why didn't your cake rise? Why didn't your product recrystallize from the solvent you selected? Why did you only get a 5% yield? And I think if you can figure out the answer to these questions using prior knowledge, then you're on the right track. So these are things I hear all the time. And is there anyone here who would say that they are bad at cooking or cannot bake? So on your Zoom, if you hover over the reaction buttons, you can press a thumbs up. So give me a thumbs up, or some if you're a bad chef, okay? Quite a few. Okay, so a bit more worrying. These are phrases I hear quite a lot, especially from undergraduates. Oh, I never get the right product. I'm not very good at synthetic chemistry. So, you know, equally, students and staff, give me a thumbs up if you would say you were a bad synthetic chemist. There's no judgment here. Okay, some surprising ones. And now I don't know whether the people think they're a chemist or a bad cook. But what I would say is, no, you're not a bad cook or a bad synthetic chemist. You just haven't been taught properly, or rather, you haven't had the space and time to develop and practice beforehand. And, you know, this is something that I would happily defend to the death. I really believe that if you're taught how to cook or do chemistry properly and learn to master simple skills and techniques and understand each step in the procedure, you can be a good cook or chemist and get successful results. You know, this is how we learn all other skills like driving, playing an instrument. And this is something I also really believe about synthetic chemistry. I think if people learn properly how to perform certain skills and have confidence in their ability in the lab, then they can move on to synthesizing these more complex and difficult molecules. And this is something I'll talk about a little bit later in the talk, and the justifications for my views on the pedagogy of teaching lab skills, and how I came to design my postgraduate skills course for organic chemists. So instructions, recipes, experimental procedures, lab scripts, whatever you want to call them, whether it's for the kitchen or the lab, the general structure is normally the same. So you've got your ingredients or your starting materials. You have to mix them together in a certain way or use a different method to produce a different target material, process the crude product to get your end result. There's a lot of parallels between the lab and the kitchen, and this is something modern chefs certainly have been capitalising on. So I've included Heston because I think he's really the face of this type of molecular gastronomy. So here he is making some sort of, I don't know, freeze-dried lollipop, I guess. So chefs are using our traditional lab equipment to make all kinds of weird and wonderful foods. So they make like flavoured snow with liquid nitrogen, the super concentrate flavours with evaporation techniques, like the rotavap, these weird jelly sort of ball things that, I don't know, probably taste of steak pie or something. I mean, basically it looks to me like just trying to make food not seem like food, which, you know, I guess is pretty fun. And the crossover is getting more obvious. So you'd be forgiven for thinking these two were in lab coats, not chef's whites. And they're using a technique of rotary evaporation here to, I guess, either concentrate non-volatile compounds in a mixture to intensify the flavour, or to extract kind of volatile aroma and flavour molecules. And this is great. Often in the kitchen, when I've got my sort of chemist hat on, I think of things that would be so much easier if I was using lab equipment. So to make the perfect roux, or like a savoury white sauce, you've got to constantly stir at a relatively consistent speed for the entire time it's cooking. And my mind immediately went to magnetic stirrer bars and hot plates. I wanted to test this in the lab, but COVID got in the way, so I never got a chance to test my theory. I feel like it probably would have been a total disaster. So, I mean, maybe I'm secretly glad I didn't try it and ruin my dreams. And, you know, most cocktail bars are kind of messing about with chemistry techniques. You can get all kinds of these smoking, exciting cocktails, but it's also good to remember that, you know, they're not actual chemists, and they really need to be more aware of the dangers and the theory associated with these chemicals. This was a girl, I think a few years back. She had her stomach really badly damaged from drinking one of these nitrous concoctions. I think it was like a Jaeger bomb with nitrogen, liquid nitrogen or something. Anyway, so it's clear to see that the restaurant and bar business are taking tricks from chemists, but is there something that we then can learn from them? And I think there is. When I interviewed for this job as a lecturer here, one of the things I had to present was my idea for how I would teach a synthetic skills course for postgraduate students, where their lab experience was very varied. And in the case of some international students, completely unknown. And my proposal was to take inspiration from a cordon bleu cookery course. So at cordon bleu, the head chef demonstrates to the students how to do one simple thing until they can get it right. So it could be, I don't know what he's doing there, I think it's temperature probing something, but you know, it could be making a perfect choux pastry. You know, each step in the process is drilled into the students, and they practice until they get it perfect. It's treated as a technical skill, like driving, that they have to learn how to do correctly before they then go off and make something independently. So, you know, I was never suggesting I wanted to be some sort of head chef type screaming at students who'd mess up a recrystallization, but I did see the value in learning isolated synthetic techniques in a non-assessed, formative, relaxed environment. In my head, my idea was if research students were confident doing the basic skills and really understood the theory and reasoning behind each step in a synthetic reaction, this could increase their confidence and aptitude to take on more complex and difficult syntheses. And this came from my theory about how I think anyone can be a good cook if you're taught properly. So you may recognize the woman in this slide, Nigella Lawson. Now, I love Nigella to bits, but she's a special kind of cook, I would say. And those who are familiar with her work or tried her recipes may feel, you know, inadequate if your perfect roast turkey didn't come out as wonderful as her Insta-friendly version. I mean, you might, if you're set an age or from the UK, you might remember the just brilliant Royal Family episode where Denise tries and fails to recreate a Nigella Christmas. And, you know, this was so funny because it was so relatable. People couldn't live up to the domestic goddess in her recipe books. You know, a typical recipe from Nigella usually includes like a whimsical trip, you know, to the market, or there tends to be a lot of pre-knowledge assumed. Exact specifics are not always given, you know, so it can be like a glug, a pinch, a sprinkle. In short, our recipes can be a little bit like the experimental section in a journal paper. And Now, I am absolutely not, one would never hit two women against each other. I admire them for totally different reasons. But for me, Delia is just the absolute boss. Yeah, a little bit because of a drunken screaming at Norwich City fans, which I've included here. Also, the other sort of famous Norwich person, Bimini Bon Boulash. But mainly, I love Delia because she assumes no prior knowledge. So nothing is too small to teach people. And the press absolutely rinsed her for teaching the nation how to boil an egg. But the fact is, if you've never been taught to boil an egg, you don't know how to do it. Boiling an egg is not some inherent life skill you're born with. You need information on water temperature, best egg size, time left to boil, etc. I still, to this day, have a quick Google of Delia boiled egg if I forget the timings. And this is how I feel about certain synthetic skills. You know, if you never run a flash chromatography column before, why would you be expected to magically know how to do it in the research or undergraduate lab? If you don't understand the mechanics behind the theory, how will you be able to select an appropriate solvent? How will you know how to correctly load the column? And this leads me to something else that I am really passionate about for undergraduate and postgraduate students, and that is equity of opportunity for all students. So this is a really nice graphic, I think, that explains the difference between equality and equity. So in the first scenario, kind of dropping everybody in at the same position doesn't necessarily lead to equality. Giving support based on what you need is better, but this can raise a lot of issues. There's all kinds of discussions centered around need and deservedness, but also the individual's perception of what they need and what they're willing to ask for, how far they're willing to go to get that support. So for me, the important thing is this one. Just remove the barrier entirely. Everyone is brought up to the same position. Everyone learns how to boil an egg. So some students may have been exposed to more advanced synthetic techniques pre-university. They might have been to a private school with lots of equipment. Some may be mature students who've had lab experience or been out the lab a while. Some students may not have set foot in a typical laboratory. And I think in the undergraduate lab especially, the pressure of being thrown in the lab with nothing but a script to work from can be really difficult for some students. You know, I would love for students to have the opportunity to come in and learn some traditional lab techniques before they go into the lab. There's no space currently for students to make mistakes, try new approaches, investigate variables and really test their own technical ability without it being in the context of this pressurized situation where you have to produce a final product. So in this experiment from Chem 008, which is the old first year experiments that we used to do before lockdown. So I've listed all the skills that are included and tested through doing this experiment. So like setting up a reaction for reflux, extracting into an organic solvent, you learn how to recrystallize, purify something by recrystallization. And you learn that as you're doing the experiment. But I think it would be really useful if students had learned these isolated techniques first, so that when it came to seeing a procedure like this to work through, they would have a greater insight into what needed to be done and a knowledge of why certain things worked or didn't work if things kind of went a bit wrong in the lab. So in my synopsis, I promised a Yorkshire pudding recipe, so I'm going to shoehorn it in here, but it has a serious message. It's included to demonstrate the value of learning one simple skill to inform more advanced practice. So if you're not from the UK and you are wondering what a Yorkshire pudding is, it's basically a pancake you put in the oven and have with a Sunday roast dinner. It's a tiny part of the meal, but if you get it wrong, the whole meal can be ruined. It also originated in the north of England, where I'm from. And, you know, it's a serious business. There's blogs dedicated to it. There's heart-shaped ones. This looks disgusting. Maybe, Gresha, maybe you can weigh in on this. It's a Sunday dinner craft beer. You know, even the RSC got involved at one point. So, you know, it's a serious science. So this is my masterclass. Okay, so you take 4 eggs, and they've got to be as fresh as possible, and break them into a bowl. Then you sift from a really high up distance, 140 grams of plain flour, it can't be self-raising. Mix it together, and then really slowly add 200 ml of cold semi-skimmed milk. So about 20 ml at a time, as you mix to a smooth batter. Then a key thing is leave the batter to sit as long as possible in the fridge, at least an hour, just as long as you can possibly prep it. Then preheat the oven to 220. Add a really high flash point oil, so don't use olive oil or anything fancy like that. Beef dripping is best, rapeseed if you're veggie, to a muffin tin, and then preheat this in the hot oven. And then only when the oil is like absolutely smoking hot, like when you open the door, it kind of like, you know, chokes you a bit. Take the tin out and quickly pour the batter filling into each muffin tin, so it's about 1/3 full. Be careful, but the aim is for the muffin tin to be out of the oven for as little time as possible. Then put the tin back in the oven until the Yorkshires are golden and raised, and do not, under any circumstances, open the oven door while they're cooking. Okay, so if you follow all of these, you will get these. So I couldn't find a picture anywhere. I just found this randomly on my phone because I haven't got a kitchen at the moment. This, I think, was one I must have sent to my mum or something. So now imagine that you get a recipe like this for toad in the hole. So again, for non-UKers, this is a Yorkshire pudding with sausages in. Really getting a taste for the culinary sophistication of the UK. So if you came in blind and followed this recipe, you'd probably make this, number 1, gross. But if you'd had the chance to practice making Yorkshire puddings, you could use your prior knowledge and skills, and you'd probably make one that looks a bit more like this. And this isn't just the aesthetic. Like, I know number 1 is going to taste gross. It looks like some weird cake. I can tell exactly what they've done wrong. They've not had the pan and the oil hot enough. They've cooked it for too long at too long a heat. It's sunk in the bottom, so they might have even opened the oven to check. But yeah, so this really is about using your prior knowledge to then go on and do something a bit more complicated. And this is really where I think it can apply to improving students in the research lab. So, you know, if you're fully confident and proficient in synthesizing these compounds to begin with, the likelihood that you will be able to alter the procedure successfully will increase. And this is what I really did in my PhD project. So because I was so confident in my ability to synthesize this particular polymer, I then had the confidence and the skills to try all different other types of architectures of polymers. So you can also cut the variables if you're confident in your synthetic knowledge and skill set. And this leads me to the creation of the synthetic skills module that I kind of hinged my entire interview on. I think a few people in the audience are taking the lockdown version of Chem 0075. So really how I built this was I used Wiggins and Mattai's concept of backward design. So this is where an educational curriculum is designed by setting goals before you choose the instructional methods and assessment. So I consulted with organic research fellows in the department and synthetic PhD students, and they identified a number of technical and professional skills that were identified as being important. So from this, I propose these 5 major learning outcomes. So number 1, I really wanted students to try and understand this interaction between scientific theory and experimentation, be able to apply methodologies to conduct chemical synthesis and analysis in a research environment. Number 3, be able to design and carry out synthetic experiments and also, really importantly, accurately record and analyse independently the results of these experiments. Number 4, know how to access, search and use the chemical literature to help with this. Also super important. And finally, learning objective 5, be aware of the safety issues in chemical research. You know, when you're working in a research lab, you have a lot more independence and you're a lot more vulnerable maybe to making mistakes because everything's not written out for you. You kind of got to figure it out yourself. And what I did was I basically broke down an experimental procedure into 4 main steps. So synthesis, workup or isolation, purification and analysis. Sounded really basic, but I wanted to make it really crystal clear what role each part of a reaction played in the overall synthesis. So students had a really good idea of what they were doing and why. I wanted the students to be able to practice the technical skills in a low pressure, non-assessed environment, because this has been proven to maximize memory formation. I devised a series of demonstration lectures. So I taught the theory behind a technical skill as if I was in a cordon bleu cookery class, right? And then the students performed a mini experiment where the technique would be practiced in isolation with really sort of one-on-one help from PGTA demonstrators and myself. Again, this was all formative and non-assessed, give students the freedom to kind of make mistakes and ask questions without fear of, you know, not getting higher marks because they'd ask a question or all the kind of things that students worry about. And then students then work through this kind of normal scripted experiment that incorporated the learned technique, which was assessed. And I also made sure the lectures were very diagram and kind of physical demonstration heavy, which allowed a kind of productive learning environment for English as a second language students, which, you know, postgraduate taught students tends to be a higher percentage than undergraduate. And at the beginning of the course, I asked students to rate how, from 0 to 5, how confident they felt performing a range of technical tasks. So I got them to do this before the course and after the course. And by the end of the course, all students had a confidence level of 4 or 5 in all the tasks that we surveyed. I appreciate that there is obviously issues with students kind of maybe self-assessing how good they are at it. They might think they're confident and then not, but the majority of students obtained really high grades in the module. So I think they did learn through it. So student evaluation questionnaires were submitted and had a 65% response rate. In the SEQ, most students agreed that the theoretical and practical elements were at a level that was appropriate. The ones who disagreed found it too easy. So based on this feedback, I made a number of changes this year. So this year, I'm running like formative skills, additional sessions for students who need more help, and omit these from the normal timetable. So, you know, more experienced students don't feel that it's too simplistic. So yeah, and students enjoyed the course, but, you know, that's all very well and good and very nice, but, you know, did it achieve its main objective? Did it increase students' ability in the research laboratory? And, you know, my biggest sadness for this course is that I never got to see if it did. I never got to see if it helped students in the lab. The first year I run it was 2019. And when it came for students to start their research projects, lockdown happened, a lot of the students travelled back to their hometowns and countries and had to undertake computational projects. So I think this year I feel will hopefully answer those kind of questions that I have about the real life effectiveness, which to me is really the most important thing in all of this as we're doing. Is just, you know, does it help the students? Does it increase their ability? Does it increase their confidence? Do they feel better in the lab? And so that's me, and it's the end of my year as president, and I just, you know, really want to give just such a massive thank you to the CPS committee. They are an absolutely amazing bunch of individuals, and I just think they're really brilliant. This year has been so hard on everyone, and especially students, and they have persevered unconditionally to make sure that CPS is as good as, or better as it's always been. They've worked so hard getting speakers from all across the globe, taking time out from their own studies to run these talks, made sure that talks run all through the week, 2-3 talks a week, and all times during the day to accommodate international time zones. You know, student well-being has been in the forefront of all their minds, and they've made so much effort to try and fill in the gaps for students and help overcome this kind of lack of socialization and peer learning with study groups and peer learning from older years with, you know, wellbeing workshops, digital social events, and, you know, really full calendar of talks. I just think they've worked so hard, and we as a department should feel so super lucky that we have these students and such a strong society. And I certainly feel very lucky to have worked with them all. So yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, I'll happily take any questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tamara. That was an absolute incredible talk. You've definitely convinced me that a good cook makes a good chemist. So I think I should work on my cooking.
I'll stop sharing. Although I like this picture, actually. I'll stop sharing soon.
If you want to put any questions in the chat or unmute yourself, put your hand up.
Oh, yeah. So I'm just reading the comments. I'm just laughing at Mike's. I'm literally making Yorkshire pudding now.
Yeah, can I ask you a question related to that, Tamara?
Yes.
So, I mean, great talk. You were saying how important it is to understand the theory behind either your recipe or what you're doing in the lab. So one thing I've never understood, why do you need to rest your Yorkshire pudding batter?
So there's a really good scientific blog, but it annoys me because an American wrote it, and it's about Yorkshire puddings, and I just don't feel. But they did like some tests where they did one that rested and one that didn't, and they had like what it did. I think it's something to do with like proving, or almost similar to bread making. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure.
If
So
I can,
I
might be able to answer that question for you. I think.
Oh, brilliant! Go ahead.
It's as far as where it's to do with gluten formation. It's to help. It's so that you develop enough gluten so it maintains the structure when it rises, but not overdeveloping it so it becomes too tough and chewy.
Well, mine only had 15 minutes and it's in the oven now, so. We'll
15 minutes is all right. I think it's not as soon as you like make it and then just tip it in.
I'm afraid
You've got to have something.
you'll probably have finished by the time it comes out. Otherwise, I'd show you all. But.
Oh. Why are you making Yorkshire puddings? What are you having? A roast dinner?
It's toad in the hole.
Ah, okay.
And we had some sausages, and I like toad in the hole.
I really wish we could have seen if yours was like 1 or 2 after the ones that I did. But Vicky's answered as well. I'll
circulate photos afterwards.
Just seen a question from Susan. Have you used a mechanical stirrer? Yeah, I did. Yeah, I used to oven dry the stirrer bar, and yeah, I used that in the polymerization. And sometimes if I made really branched polymers, the stirrer bar would get stuck as it kind of gelled or became too kind of viscous. Christina, for synthetic organic chemists, which recipe do you recommend we start cooking with? Well, you know what? Lab 14 made, was it maybe someone else can jump in, made a Victoria sponge?
Yeah.
So I think that, I do think that's a pretty good one to start with, actually. Cake, yeah.
I think you also make ice cream at one point in Lab 14.
Oh, okay. Yeah, also again, because it's that kind of, it's about kind of the formation of the crystals, right? You've got to keep churning it and freezing it and churning it and freezing it. Yeah. Some new messages. Pound cake, yeah. Caramel. Do you know what, Stephen? I can never make caramel right. So I'm disproving my own theory, but yeah. Filter coffee. Yeah, that's I was going to put a little thing about the new sort of fangled cold brew and, you know, all that sort of silly thing when you go into like a trendy coffee shop in East London.
Caramel's really hard to make. So I think it's not representative.
Yeah. I can never do the one where you're meant to boil condensed milk, right? That just never seems to work for me.
Miguel, is that the filter coffee?
Oh!
That's some glassware, yeah. Put a little cone there. It works great. But then cleaning it, you need lab equipment.
That's really cool.
Which celebrity chef would make the best chemist? That's from Patrick Melton. Probably one of the molecular gastronomy guys, right? So maybe Heston, or I actually don't know any other ones. Yeah, I think the ones who are already like faffing about with rotary evaporators and that kind of thing, they're probably the next best thing. Not sugar. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, you can't exactly like smash around acidic prod, you know. Yeah.
I think we'll wrap up now and go into breakout rooms so we can have some more informal questions. But I just want to say a massive, massive thank you to the whole committee and for all the audience who keep coming each week and hyping us up and enjoying the talks. And we really appreciate you. I just want to shout out the whole committee. So there's Miranda, there's Wendy, Tina Maria, Rachel, Sarah. Oh, don't let me forget anyone. Christoph, Andre, Chrissy, Blake and Harry, and they've done an absolutely amazing job organising all the events this year, and we should give them a massive round of applause. And Tamara and Kresha, who are our president and vice president.